Oh, hello there. Yes, just in the middle of a kind of stint of work. I look forward to tomorrow when I stop briefly. Whilst I was at work today, I was listening to talk radio, and they had a certain Andre Walker on as their political commentator for the day, and I thought it would be fun to have a look at that and just unpack some of the great things that he says. Firstly, they're talking about democracy and COVID, and Andre comes out with every opinion you'd expect him to, and then they talk about cancel culture and equality, and Andre comes out with every opinion you'd expect him to. Yeah, I'll allow the two segments to talk for themselves. There's not really a lot for me to say. Suffice to say, just this one if you like, can't they get somebody who's just a bit more intelligent than him on? Yeah, somebody that actually kind of is in any way, shape or form read? Might be an idea. Anyway, see what you think. It's a thing.
Let's turn our attention to taking a view on those and indeed the rest of the news. Joining me this morning is Andre Walker, political commentator. Andre, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Really well, thank you for joining me, Andre. So, look, we've got one of those days where every single paper has the same story and they are all concerning themselves as to whether or not we will see further lockdown restrictions. OK, Andre, this is a risky move. I'm going to make you Boris Johnson. You can't do a worse job. But what would you do now as Prime Minister?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is to remove the Prime Minister, Chris Whitty, and return us to a democratic situation. I don't believe that we should have only medics talking about the response to the pandemic. We've got to talk to people who are interested in economics, people who are interested in the pub, bar trade, and also people who are interested in education and mental health. What we have done...
Right, OK, Andre, yeah. All of those things are to do with the economy, Andre. The economy's the big thing. So the pub and bar trade is, mental health is, and schools are, just on a really blunt level. So, yeah, return us to a democratic situation whereby in a pandemic the politicians are going to make the right choice, are they, Andre? I think you don't want the politicians to make the right choice. I think you want them to make the standard right-wing choice, which is, oh, to hell with it, we can't interfere with the economy, which, of course, we will do by default if people suddenly aren't turning up at work because they're infected. But, hey, let's not let that get in our way.
James is embarked on a huge experiment. Chris has had a great time. He's enjoyed himself and he's done pretty well in terms of the great medical experiment that he's done whilst he controlled this country. But now we've got to return to real life.
Hang on a second. His job is to provide advice to government. If government doesn't have a backbone to say, this is not the right response, we are not going to go and do this, that's the government's fault, not Chris Whitty's fault. I would say Chris Whitty has done everything in his role and his job. What I'm concerned about, though, is that the data that the government is asking for us to be presented with has not been good enough. So, for example, why...
Right, OK. Yes, Andre Walker doesn't really understand public health medicine. James Mack has an inkling of it. But at the same time, he doesn't understand the concept of data and how the fact that it might well not be as applicable as it can be. He's going to come out with a reason. He's going to come out with an argument that we need to understand fully how many people, for example, die from COVID in hospitals. That data is potentially available, but the backlog of getting it would make it useless in an epidemic. Let's move on.
Why are we not seeing the data that says this is the number of hospital admissions today, these are the number of people who were not vaccinated, so that people can then make up their own mind as to whether the vaccine is effective or not? And where is the very clear guidance as to people who died with and not from COVID?
Well, let me just answer that really simply. Look, if you think that the medical advisors and the NHS advisors are not running this country, then watch your average press conference from Downing Street about the people that are telling you not to mix at Christmas. It's not the democratically elected MPs. It's not government ministers. It's government advisors who are completely...
Right, yeah, Andre, at the last COVID press conference that we had, Boris Johnson basically said to people to go out and mix at Christmas, and his advisors sort of stuck their hand in the air and went, So that's not actually happening, is it? But again, you end up with this libertarian right-wing argument that magically the people secretly running the country are not a whole bunch of billionaires aided by tame politicians, but magically are a bunch of medics. Let's move on.
Hang on a second.
Unelected.
But Andre, I don't want anybody who's elected to anything presiding over matters of health. I'm sorry. But they need to. It's the elected politicians who need to help us navigate through this.
Is the better option, therefore, to surrender democracy completely to a man who is clearly incapable of even dealing with two people trying to get a selfie with him on the street? Right,
it's not a dichotomous situation, is it? In a democracy, one would hope that senior government advisors would advise and that government would listen and therefore make decisions, which what appears to be happening. And it's a bit below the belt, Andre, to suggest that somebody being harassed by drunken idiots in the street therefore can't make rational choices. I don't know, folks. Maybe if you're a bit drunk and you see Andre out on the streets, you could harass him. I'm sure he'll make perfectly rational responses on that basis.
We have totally given up our concept of liberty. We've totally given up our concept of our own right to make a decision over medicine. Look, I'm not going to compare modern Germany to what happened in the past, but it is a definite fact that the prohibition of mandatory medical treatment came about after the disgraceful, sickening situation that took place.
Andre, you just said you weren't going to do that, and then you've just done it. I mean, what a lot of drivel. The prohibition of mandatory medical treatment came about after the Second World War. Stop. You cannot. You just said that you're not going to compare it, and then you have. I'm sorry, it's rubbish.
I haven't done that.
Well, you just have. By implication. I'm sorry, it's just unacceptable.
I haven't by implication.
It's just unacceptable.
I've simply made the point that the prohibition of mandatory medical treatment came about after the Second World War.
Again, you've done it again.
Fact.
Unacceptable.
But it's a fact. In what way is that not a fact?
Okay, Andre, it isn't a fact because there are laws before the Second World War that prescribe spurious medical interventions with the body. As a worldwide concept, it's 1975. But I mean, if one only has to look at the force feeding of suffragettes to realise that government policy changes. It is still legal, by the way, in this country to force feed somebody if a group of medics, that key one again, decide that that's the case. So, Andre doesn't really know what he's talking about here. James Max's particular sort of leaping in here might seem like a principled position, but I think Talk Radio are extremely nervous about realistically letting people like Andre off the leash, because he will just spout absolute rubbish out of his mouth, and you're never really quite sure when he's going to stray into that kind of wearing a black uniform territory. And, oh God, yes, it's all Nazism, isn't it? Getting to wear a face mask is effectively what he's trying to say, and James is, basically trying to stomp on that. They're both wrong, actually, because James is slightly mischaracterising what he's saying, but not by much. Andre doesn't know about human rights. He would actually mention human rights, I think, if he had any knowledge of it, but it's just stuff that he's seen on social media. That's what he boasts on.
First of all, you've demolished your argument. Secondly, it is unacceptable to use any kind of comparison between the two. I'm sorry, it's just...
So just, James, to be clear, was the prohibition on mandatory medical treatment not brought in after the Second World War? I'm confused.
Well, I think you are confused, but judging by the argument...
Yes, but a lot later, Andre, and it varies from country to country. There is no moratorium across the board in the UK on statutory medical treatment. If you end up being sectioned, mate, you'll understand that. Might come soon, you never know.
Pick there to try and give yourself some thought. I hear what you're saying in terms of democracy, but what I don't hear is if we had stronger politicians and better politicians who were providing good leadership by sticking to the rules that they had set, number one, by setting out good data and therefore agreeing good policy, then the professional advisors, people like Chris Whitty, would be in a much better place to be able to do what they need to do, which is to provide advice that we can either take or leave. And that's...
Right, okay, just call a halt to that point, because I want to jump ahead to another bit.
As opposed to trolling her and cancelling her, wouldn't we get more value from having the conversation to understanding the issues that she and many others want to present, so that as a society we can come up with an opinion or an informed opinion on something that particularly us men, I'm afraid, are very often left out in the dark because we are somewhat ignorant. And as far as I'm concerned, I look at this row, what I do know is I don't know enough about this. And if I'm just going to hear one side of the argument, then I'm definitely not going to be educated to make an informed decision.
Okay, yeah, talking about J.K. Rowling, once again we get the word cancelled bounded around a bit. And yeah, I mean, James is making an important point there. Unfortunately, of course, his angle's also missing the point because we don't get to hear both sides of the argument. This is just simply right-wing media telling us that there are these evil balaclava-wearing trans activists, mobs who are just out to get people and they won't listen to reason. Which isn't listening to an argument. That's simply characterising your opponents as being bad.
But look, I was involved in the National Union of Students, which I admit is not the bastion of democratic choice in this country. But look, I saw it all the time. The number one thing that a group of people want to do is not debate the issues, not have an argument. What they simply want to do is bully and corral you. They don't want you to hear the argument for or against their political views, because their political views are indefensible. There is no way you can support socialist economics or socialist systems of government or socialist chuckle free speech. What you have to do is stop people from ever being able to come up and disagree with you. That's the way these people want to operate. I believe it's your patriotic duty to actually debate every single issue.
Right, okay then, yes. Right, let's sort of just unpack that very slightly. I wonder why it is that for donkey's years the National Union of Students have been, as Andre says, socialist. Yeah, young people, who by definition are going to be the best educated in the country, seem to consistently come up with the same answer to these difficult questions, Andre. Could it be that they know something that you don't? I'm just going to put that one out there. Socialist economics is indefensible. I will I suggest that you watch my previous video on why that might be a laughable concept. And yeah, we need to debate the issues. Okay then, let's do so. But we're not, are we? We're just simply characterising our opponents, again, as bad people.
In a fair-minded
Okay,
manner.
Is it fair enough though to whether it's offend people or otherwise? Because there's another story here. Beano. So children's comic. This is in today's Times. The children's comic, the Beano, has changed the name of one of its characters after 67 years to avoid causing offence. So the comic's creators, they've renamed Spotty, one of the Bass Street Kids, to Scotty. Spotty's real name is James Scott Cameron, but he had been nicknamed Spotty by fellow characters since the Bass Street Kids first appeared in 1954. I think also the comic recently renamed Fatty as Freddy. I mean, on one hand, children have been targeted over the colour of their hair, over the size of themselves, over skin complexions and other things. It probably has made their lives worse. Maybe it's better that we don't call people by names based on looks. But on the other hand, are we just becoming a little bit too woke?
Yeah, I think we are. And I'm not going to name the particular pub, but there's a pub in Scotland called the Black Bee.
Okay, the word he's striving for there is bitch, and I'm always amused when right-wing commentators do this. They say, oh, we must simply use whatever language we want. We can't be dictated to by these spurious modern conventions, and Andre Walker doesn't even have the ability to use the word bitch, which is, let's face it, Andre, it's a word you should be allowed to use, shouldn't we, on air. Yeah. He's just crumbling to modern social norms, isn't he? And as I say, this happens all the time with right-wing commentators. They demand the right to say whatever they want, and then when you say to them, well, then go on then, mate, and magically they suddenly start fumbling around with their words because they know that it's unacceptable what they're going to say.
Female name for a dog. And that was banned recently by Green King, the pub brewery, because they fully misunderstood what that story was all about. It was
right. It wasn't banned. The brewery chain that owns the pub decided to change its name, not because of the historical record of it, if you like, in part, but because people would misunderstand it. Andre, misunderstand it. People would misunderstand it, Andre.
Not a racist or sexist reference. And I think sometimes we go a bit too far. Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't have a problem with any company or any organisation looking at themselves and saying, look, let's not set out to offend people. But I think at the same time, we're taking it far too far. And I think time and time again, actually, we're accusing ourselves of discrimination where discrimination just doesn't exist. And I think this is probably an example of that.
Another one then. Oxford Dons. This is in the Telegraph.
Oh, no, they're definitely wrong. Move on. No, I'm joking.
Well, I think they might be. Oxford, actually, you might be in support of them. Oxford Dons are furious that a candidate's woke score could be part of the criteria for hiring academics under new proposals aimed at boosting staff diversity. The university's Race Equality Task Force has published a series of recommendations aimed at increasing the number of people it hires from ethnic minority backgrounds. In a consultation document seen by The Telegraph, the task force said it was important to embed EDI, which stands for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, into all recruitment. Is that right?
No, the number one...
Well, yeah, Andre, before you say anything, it is right, okay? First of all, there's the Equalities Act, which I'm sure as a journalist you're fully familiar with. And, secondly, no, we can't possibly take people, from those kind of backgrounds. After all, that might be what, I don't know, because Andre's going to come on to this, a sort of, social inclusion or mobility thing. And let's not forget that for the last 40 plus years in this country, various governments, various hues, have been trying to get more diverse student body into Oxford, Cambridge, et al., those top universities, and have manifestly failed to do so. And this is, as well, don't forget, it's just a consultation document. It's a consultation document. It's not what they're necessarily going to do, but let's not worry about that now. We just put the word woke on it and it instantly becomes something bad. Go on, Andre.
The thing that boosts attainment is good quality schools, and we are not willing to take on the National Education Union when they're lazy and feckless teachers in the city centres right off. Not just black kids, working class white kids as well, who have the worst attainment of them all.
Right, okay, Andre. No, they don't. First up. Secondly, teachers are feckless, aren't they? Collectively, as a body. I'm not noticing him working up a sweat with this one. I mean, it's just lazy. It's just such lazy rhetoric, isn't it? Yeah? Yeah. I mean, if you did a Venn diagram of people that think Andre is telling the truth and people that are intelligent, all right, they wouldn't overlap at all, would they? Final bit, let's see what pearls of wisdom Andre has in terms of social mobility.
Do you know what we're interested in doing? Let's fill our diversity quotas. Let's get more people from the home counties, but this time they'll be black rather than white. Okay. I will tell you something. During this lockdown, we've destroyed social mobility, and actually we need to deal with it in the schools, not at Oxford University.
Right, yeah. No, Andre, what destroyed social mobility was introducing the type of economics that you're so keen on into the whole of society. That's what's done it. Okay? Across the Western world, neoliberal economics have destroyed social mobility. Oddly, not lefty teachers. Oddly. Gosh, how is it that a group of people with no real economic or social power in society can ruin things for everyone else? Well, whenever Andre says they can.
We certainly do. Andre, we'll come back to you for some more thoughts very shortly. Also, we're going to be...
Yeah, and I don't think they do, actually. I think unless I've missed something, they don't actually come back to him.